Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I am super excited to talk about a subject that's become my life's passion, and that passion is how to create amazing cultures within organizations. Beautiful picture, isn't it? You'll come to find that's more than just a pretty landscape as we go through the presentation, but truth be told, I used to think I was a beach guy, and that was until I went skiing for the first time. And so not only was I hooked by the beautiful mountain landscape, but I was also quickly to learn how powerful of a force a mountain actually is. And so, as you said, my name is Russell Dubry. I'm with Performance Faction. I help companies build high-performance cultures, and today I'm going to share with you the 8 keys to a high-performance culture. I can pause for 1 second if there's a few seats up here if you want to fill in there. I did brush my teeth today, so you can sit on the front row if you want. So 68 million people, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, quit their jobs in 2021. 68 million. Now that's a big number. That's not Mega Millions lottery big, but it's a little disappointing now when you see only 30-some million on that billboard compared to the 1.3 billion. But experts are still trying to decipher what all that means, and we know we've had the terminology from the Great Resignation to the Great Reshuffle, and now we have another great. What's the thing they're saying now? Anybody know? Resignation. The Great Regret. That's the new one we're saying. And so I don't think a major event like the pandemic changed who we are as humans. It just changed what we're willing to tolerate, and most importantly in the workplace. And that's what makes the topic of culture all the more important today. Let's talk about mountains some more. So that's a picture of my son and I, and we were super stoked in this picture. We had just completed our first big ski run, which you can see there in the background. And I'm on the left, on the right, but if we're actually to take this picture today, our height differences would be flip-flopped. He's a tall kid. But we were not just excited because of the challenge itself. We just unlocked so many new parts of the mountain that we were now able to go ski on that we'd only looked longingly and wished we could be on before. So our skiing adventures were about to get a lot more fun. Let's talk really quickly how mountains are made. Didn't know you were going to get a geology lesson today. But there's multiple processes involved, but they pretty much all center around 2 large forces underneath the ground pushing against each other, creating tension so that the only place for the ground to go is up. And over the course of a long period of time, we get what we see is a mountain. And so if those elements didn't come together, or if one simply ran right past the other, we would have maybe a small hill or flat land. Now, being from the Midwest, I love a good prairie landscape, but you don't too often hear flat land used as an analogy when people talk about building something great. And so what does culture have to do with mountains, you might ask yourself? Let me just share briefly my own business story. And what better way to tell a business story than a line of the revenue over the years? So in 2006, I founded a digital agency. We focused on website technology and building all things online. And went from what I would say is pretty much near failure to, over the course of time, growing a pretty good business and being pretty successful from the Dallas area and pretty well known for our space in the Dallas area. And that eventually led to a sale of the business and continued to stay on after and grew the business until I'm doing what I'm doing now. And that little dip there in 2017 when we took our eye off the ball and sold the business. So the question you might be asking is, what happened there? What happened where we kind of got to what I said is near failure and then we're able to achieve, pretty successful growth story? And so the reality is in 2011, after 5 years of struggling through the business, we came to an epiphany. We had become too focused on things like revenue, profit, sales, expenses, your stereotypical business metrics. And we just thought if we showed up, operated the business, weren't mean, tried to do good work, nice to our team, paid people decently well, that everyone was going to be happy, customers, clients, team, all the like. We were just a little bit wrong. The mountain we built wasn't made of revenue, profit, sales, expenses. Our mountain was culture. And culture is the foundation for a successful business. If you want to build a mountain of a business, you first have to build a mountain of a culture. And the real big mindset shift that occurred for us that allowed that growth to happen was saying not only do we want to hire the best talent for our team, but we want to create an environment where they can truly thrive and be successful. And that single focus is what allowed us to turn the business around. So probably many of you are sitting there saying to yourselves, Russell, I know tons of big successful companies that have horrible cultures. How can this be true? You're right. There is an exception, and you're not wrong. The exception is that your product is so entrenched or so highly coveted in people's lives, you can get by with bad culture. And this exception exists because people tolerate it because of all the subsequent issues, because they can throw money at it, or they just consider it the cost of doing business as it relates to high turnover. And this is true whether you're an employee or a customer of the business. So, audience participation moment. What businesses come to mind when you think of successful businesses that have bad cultures? Any brave souls want to throw out some businesses out there that come to mind when you think of that? Amazon. Oh yeah, I hear that all the time. Tesla, yes. Walmart. Talk more about that. Any others? You probably got a whole long list, and thank you so much for sharing those. All great examples, right? Let's talk about good culture for a minute, or business that's known with good culture. So in a minute, I'm going to pop a phrase here up on the screen, and I'm going to be willing to bet most of you know what business this relates to, and this business is known for good culture. So go ahead and just say it out there once you know what business we're talking about. You guys ready? Well, Chick-fil-A, there we go. Chick-fil-A. So it blows my mind every single time I drive by a Chick-fil-A and you see a near endless line of cars in the drive-thru. Don't know how it's possible. And for some reason, every time I look at that, I also look at all the restaurants next to it, and there's maybe 3, 4, 5 times or more cars in the Chick-fil-A line than there is in those other restaurants. And so, would you argue, does anyone here want to argue that Chick-fil-A has 5 times as good as food as its competitors? My kids like to think so. But here's the real question. If you think it's 5 times as good, are you willing to pay 5 times the price? No, not so much. Now, maybe it's 1.5 times better, 2 times better, tops. So we can agree it's not the food or not just the food, but Chick-fil-A creates an amazing experience, right? Simply behind my pleasure. I'm pretty sure you could say a really bad thing to an employee and they would say my pleasure. And the case in point, so my son also was trying to get his first part-time job recently, started applying to all the places a teenager would want to do, and pretty much every place called him back within a few hours, or reached out to him within a few hours. One place just said, come now, bring your Social Security card. He had a job by day's end, except the one place he wanted to work, Chick-fil-A. Not only were they full and not hiring, but even the process to get a job at Chick-fil-A, you've got to submit a video, and you got to do a whole rigmarole for this part-time job. Right, in a time where we have all these other businesses devoting all their signage and all their advertising towards hiring and what their pay is and all those things, you've got Chick-fil-A that's saying, sorry, we're full. So perhaps there just might be a relationship between team experience and customer experience. I'm going to pop up another business here in a second, and this is a company that in the late 90s was also known, or up until I should say the late 90s, was known for having a great culture. So much, in fact, you might have heard my stint as a comedy club bouncer. When I was working in a comedy club one evening, there was a comedian on stage, and his skit was making fun of how good the customer service was for this particular business. And I don't redo comedy skits, but he was running around doing his thing, making fun of this business, and everybody was laughing hysterically because they'd all experienced the same thing, this good customer service from this business. And right, most comedy is funny because it's true. And so, even before I throw it up, does anybody have any guesses what company this would be? Southwest is not a good culture, I think, today, maybe? Yeah. Well, it was said earlier, actually, which works well to the point. It's Walmart. So probably to the point, does anyone think of great customer service when we talk about Walmart today? Yeah, you know.
Now that you have self-checkout, I'm good.
Right, yeah, yeah. We're, to the point, I would ask a person next to me in the store where something is before I would go to someone that worked at Walmart. And I think I've actually done that before. Maybe the Walmarts down here in Austin are better, I don't know. But I'll give them credit. They've stayed relevant. They've stayed in business competing on price. But I think that the competing on price has come at the cost of their customers and their team members. How long is Walmart going to last? Time will tell. We have another problem as it relates to culture, and that's its very definition. How do you define culture? What does it mean? Any brave souls want to take a stab at how they would define culture? It's a little harder one. Heard something, maybe? Trust. That's a good one.
The way things are done.
Yes, right.
I would say, how do we do things around here?
Yes, I like that. I like that. So as you think of these answers, they're all great answers. But sometimes when you read them or you hear them, you're like, and or but, and it always feels like it needs just something a little more. And same thing if you go search the definition on culture. You can find hundreds of definitions on Google of culture. And the same thing, when you read those, you're like, but it just needs just a little bit more. And this is a problem for one simple reason is, what do we tend to do as humans when we don't quite understand something, when it maybe doesn't feel tangible? We ignore it. What's that?
Might step up.
Might that do that too? But we might ignore it. We push it aside, or are far more likely to push it aside. And this is what happens a lot in today's businesses with today's business leaders. They prefer to focus on things they know and understand. Things like revenue, expenses, sales, profit. These feel tangible. I can go make a new deal tomorrow. I can cut an expense. I can buy a new piece of equipment. Those feel tangible. And so you start to hear statements like, I know culture is important, but let's go focus on sales right now, or let's look at the sales numbers, or we'll focus on culture once we become profitable. Or this is one I hear a lot. Ignore that. We have a great culture. We've got happy hours, team events, all that good stuff. We don't need to worry about culture. We have a great culture. And so the question then becomes is how do we define culture in a way that's not so squishy, not so intangible? And I like this definition the best, and it definitely complements some of the examples you guys gave, but culture, stated or unstated, is the cumulative acceptable and unacceptable behaviors within a group or a business in this case. Is it acceptable or unacceptable to miss deadlines? Is it acceptable or unacceptable to talk rudely to a customer? What's the acceptable level of the quality of work? Examples could go on and on and on. Thousands and thousands of behaviors exist within any particular group. I'm going to stop touching that. What? No. Every button moves this thing forward. Okay. So all of these behaviors, good or bad, they effectively enhance or diminish the culture of the business. Which gets me to another thought, and this is a lot of times when I'm working with clients, there's no silver bullet, there's no magical business solution. There's simply great execution. And if you really to break down Chick-fil-A's business model, you'd find there's nothing exceptional other than they show up every single day and try to produce the best value for their customers and the best value for their team. And that's it. The only innovative thing I actually find about it is why is no other business trying to do the same thing? So if you're now on board that we need a great culture to support great execution, the question becomes is how do we know a great culture when we see one? So I'm sure many of you in here have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And just real quickly for those that haven't, it's a psychological theory or framework that says as humans we have 5 basic needs that pretty much drive all our action. And while we might often want to confuse wants and needs, everything's going to default back to these sort of 5 fundamental ones. And so I'm going to share with you today a lens of that, but through the eyes of an employee-employer relationship. So first, at the bottom, the most important, the most basic is survival. And this basically just says, in order to make this relationship work, I need a paycheck and maybe some minimal benefits. And if that's the only box we're checking here, I'm going to be out the door the second something only slightly better presents itself. Next to that, we have is security. How safe is my survival? How likely is that to continue? Threats to security come in the form of the stability of the company, bad boss, a lot of things we talk about related to toxic or bad culture, right? Those become threats to security. And then we have is belonging. This is where we break from kind of the indifferent to the engaged a little bit. Belonging is, am I part of something, whether that's the team or the company itself? Do I feel like I'm being a part of a group? And the next, importance, am I successful? That group that I feel like I'm a part of, am I contributing to its success? Do I feel successful in my own right? Last but not least, when we have is self-actualization. This is really about alignment of mission and values and purpose, and are those being lived out in my role or this company that I'm at? And that's going to be the sort of the highest level in terms of this pyramid. And so, why might we want to check every single box in this pyramid? What do we assume is the outcome of that? Retention? Is that what you said? Yep, that's a good one.
Quality work.
I heard a really good keyword there. Started with it. Engagement. That ever elusive word of engagement. And why do we think engagement is so important? Because we believe, it is the common held belief that the more engaged someone is, the better they're going to perform. Oh my gosh. Russell, stop. I would stand over here, but I'd have to talk like that. So this is where the mic is. So that's it. Presentation over, right? We solved it. We know what great culture is. Not quite. Right? Remember we talk about that squishy, that intangible thing? We need culture to be actionable. So we got to go one step further. And this is where we get to the 8 keys to a high-performance culture. These 8 simple but effective principles embedded within the business is what leads to a successful business. Before we dive into each one of these individually, I see some of you taking notes here. You can do this mentally. You can do this on a pad of paper. But as we go through each one, maybe rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how you feel your current organization fits into each one of these or how well it's doing. And then as you're making a note of 1 to 10, maybe just think through why, pros and cons, why you sort of gave the rating you did. Just a quick little assessment. And if you don't feel comfortable or want to rate your company, rate maybe your team. If you don't want to rate your team, rate yourself in terms of how you embody these. And if you want to do all 3, go crazy, do all 3. And then I'm just going to cover just some kind of high talking points with each one of these. I could probably create a presentation an hour long for each one of these individually. So we're just kind of going to run through. And then later on in the presentation, I'll show a link where I've collected some resources and some reading materials you can find if you're interested in kind of diving in deeper into one of these in particular. So for today's purpose, we'll just keep it kind of at a high level. Ready, set, go. First we need is belief. Belief is number 1 on the list because it is without belief, everything else will fall through. Belief is what's going to guide us to make the right decisions when conventional wisdom, standard practice, or emotions going to get in the way. And this is most especially when things tend to go wrong. There's a great quote by Muhammad Ali, and it says, "It's a repetition of affirmations that lead to belief. And once belief becomes a deep conviction, things begin to happen." I can sound that. Can you hear me in the back all times? Okay. I don't want to have to talk like this. Next we have is purpose. A business must exist for something simply beyond the notion of making money. There's a lot more talk about this today in the business world, and it's becoming a little more well-known, but I think a common misnomer is to always think that a purpose has to be very altruistic, save the world or save the trees or something like that. That's not inherently true. It just needs to be something that people can rally behind. And if it can't occur at the company level, maybe that team can have a purpose. But one of the world's foremost experts, and many of you might have heard of Simon Sinek, wrote a great book on purpose in business called Start With Why. It says it best, but people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And that's the same whether it's a customer or employee of that organization. And so there's a great story he gives in one of the books, and it's a story of 2 stonemasons. And in this story, a person goes up to one of the stonemasons and says, "Do you love your job?" Stonemason kind of looks at him blankly for a second and says, "Sure." Days are long, it's hard work, backbreaking, but it's a paycheck, pays the bills. Person walks over just a few feet away and asks another stonemason, says, do you love your job? Person very quickly says, I love my job. Sure, the days are long, the work is hard, but I'm building a cathedral for the Almighty, a sense of purpose. So you can look at that example and you can say, which one likes their job more? Which one is probably going to get more work done? And which one is likely to continue in that role or that job function longer? And so the question is, does your company or do you have a sense of purpose that's going to get you out of bed each and every day? I heard this said earlier when talked about culture. I absolutely am in alignment with that. Integrity, also known as trust. People in the organization need to be able to trust what they see and hear within the organization, and most especially from the leaders. And you could really break down integrity and trust to being nothing more than doing what you say and saying what you do. There's other great book out there you can tell, I read a lot, by Stephen Covey. It's called The Speed of Trust. And in this book, he talks about individual or a corporation is going to do one of two things. They're going to pay trust taxes, or they're going to get paid trust dividends. Trust taxes come in the form of gatekeepers, overly complex process, all the bureaucratic red tape we might think of. That's really symbols of lack of trust. In environments where we have a lack of trust, people tend to look out for number one, being themselves. However, on the other side, trust dividends eliminate all that minutia. People are able to work more autonomously, faster, and they're incentivized ultimately to do their best work, hence the title Speed of Trust. So look at the behaviors of your organization. Are they trustworthy behaviors or are they untrustworthy? Does the company fulfill its promises? Next, very closely linked with trust is transparency. Transparency is very important to reinforce integrity. The more you share and show in your organization, the more team members can understand why and how and what's happening and why decisions are being made. The better they understand, the more empowered they are to solve issues, opportunities facing the business. Transparency creates empowerment to solve problems and create value. There is a big threat to transparency, and that's bad news. But we've seen it over and over again where leaders or other folks like to diminish and shove bad news under the rug. We can look at big scandals like Enron, Lehman Brothers, British Petroleum, and the oil spill in Florida. But how many people lost their livelihoods, their relationships, their income, because simply someone wanted to keep bad news under wraps? So if you go back and look at each of those case studies, there was no one single malicious act. I believe most people try to do good deeds on a day-to-day basis, but it was the compounding of trying to make bad news not seem so bad over and over and over again until we got what we got with those particular scandals. So how often, how much, to what extent is the organization sharing and showing information and keeping people empowered with that information? Number 5, mentorship. This is simply the practice of enhancing and developing the skills of team members in the organization. Ideally, this is done with those that know how, teaching those that don't. And I did have the great pleasure of probably serving in what I would say is the world's greatest organization when it comes to training in my time in the U.S. Air Force. Do I have any veterans in here? Oh, I got a good piece of memory. Well, thank you so much for your service. I really appreciate it. As you well know, training is everything in the military. And as many of you probably that haven't even had military experience know that from the first step through the door, you begin your training, and that does not end till your last step out the door in the military. All right, we know basic training, that's what gets the most attention, but that happens all throughout your entire career. And this is why the Air Force in particular can trust 18-year-olds to work on billion-dollar equipment. Now, I don't know how many of you have teenagers in the room, but I barely trust my teenagers to be in the kitchen alone for 5 minutes, much less work on any billion-dollar equipment that I have laying around the house. And I'd have a lot more if I won the Mega Millions, but and the reason why they can do this is because they've invested so much in their training. May need to invest in my teenagers' kitchen skills more, I guess, is to eat my own medicine there. So the question then just asked, right, is how much is the organization contributing to the growth and development of its team members? What processes, what things do they have in place to do that in a meaningful way? And likewise, are people getting better from the day they enter the company to the day they leave, not just because of their own ambition and volition, but actually how the company's helping them get there. Number 6, we have ownership, known as accountability. But if a company is going to have integrity in fulfilling its promises, it has to have a high level of ownership to make sure it does that. Most especially, again, when things don't go as planned. Right, we all know people are more than happy to claim credit when things go well. But what happens when things go wrong? Do people step up and take ownership? And we know as well, in the back of our minds at least, that customers and team members become far more forgiving when someone takes ownership of their situation versus trying to diminish it, or whatever. And this is often the best time for a great review. So just a quick example of my time at my former company, right? We built online technology, and one time we had a big oopsie. It was a large e-commerce site that we made a couple mistakes, and it went down for a while. Not good. Once we solved the real initial problem, we had a meeting with the client to come together, and when we walked in the room, they totally expected us to probably do what I said before: diminish, shove it under the rug, make it not seem as big a problem as it was. But instead, from this get-go of the conversation, we took ownership. Not only did we say we're sorry, but we laid out all the things we were going to do to prevent that problem going forward, and things we were going to do to even prevent other problems that we haven't yet uncovered. And so that saved that relationship, put a whole new playing field in terms of it, and we had that client for many, many years, which resulted in literally millions of dollars over the course of time. So is your particular culture, is it one of ownership, accountability, or is it one of blame? Fun. Everybody loves fun, right? And this is what the word, when you talk to a lot of people, what they think of when we talk about culture. We talked about it before: happy hours, team building events, different things like that. And these types of events absolutely are important. It's good to let loose and get away from the day-to-day grind. But the real challenge is how do you make the day-to-day work fun, and not be a mutually exclusive concept and not linked together. So I love this example. I learned this very on in my youth soccer coaching career. It didn't last very long. But they gave us the example, right? If you're coaching some 5-year-olds, and what do you think they're more likely to respond to if I say, hey, let's go over here and we're going to spend the next 20 minutes and we're going to work on our dribbling skills? Or what if we said, hey, we're going to go play red light, green light, and while we're doing that, we're going to kick our ball around? I know which one they responded to better. And you might be saying, well, Russell, that's business, or that's girls soccer, this is business. But the reality is that adults aren't any different. It's just we forgot we are a little different. And people love playing games. We probably all love playing games to some extent. And a big part of gameplay is winning. And so the question then just becomes is how do you put some of that gamification, that winning, that fun into the day-to-day work so it doesn't seem so boring and monotonous? So the question then we ask is how closely are fun and work linked to in your organization? Number 8, last but not least, is measurement. Since part of fun is winning, then we have to be able to measure and know when people have won the day. We see this a lot, right? Everybody knows goals, KPIs, all the different forms out there that exist to kind of track this sort of thing. But I don't know about you. I've seen tons of organizations create some amazing goals and KPIs that get shoved in a desk and never see the light of day. And we have to know that success comes from the ability to match effort and reward. The more clearly a team member can correlate their performance to real objectives that are going to move the needle, then that team member is going to perform better. And this is actually why we love sports so much, because at any given time, you can look at a score and know exactly who's winning and losing. So much to the extent, take a sport like basketball, you can even look at the other stats that have nothing to do with the score. Turnovers, rebound percentage, steals, all those metrics, and you can probably get a good guess of who's winning, or maybe it's a close game. Might not get exactly right, but you can have a good idea. And so the question to ask then is, are we measuring performance in a meaningful way within the company? And then the real challenge is that performance actually moving the needle of value, or is it actually getting in the way of creating value? So we go back to this and what happened here. What happened was the continuous implementation of these principles. Now, I can be honest and say I wasn't naming or intentionally going about these each of the time. I was just going off the basis of saying I wanted to create a great environment where people can thrive. And so in the moment, didn't really understand in context how important these would all become. And more importantly, I didn't understand how they all work together. And so we'll take a look at real quick is why are they so powerful in conjunction with each other? So we've done geology. Now we're going to get into astronomy. So I don't know if that's some extra credits for you guys. If you can, is there an astronomy HR credit you can claim? See me afterwards. We'll figure it out. But the most perfect shape in our universe is a circle. And if you really look at our entire universe, it's made up of nothing of circles of circles of circles. These perfect creations, just like our mountains, are formed by these gravitational forces pushing together, forcing these round circles and orbits. Stars against planets, planets against galaxies, galaxies against galaxies throughout the entire universe. So much, in fact, these circles are important that if you were to only change the Earth's orbit ever so slightly, it would have catastrophic consequences for life on Earth as we know it. And so a sphere is a perfect shape because of how these forces work together. So if we start to think of these 8 principles, just like we think of the ozone layer for the Earth, they perform a protective shield around the company. The stronger these are embedded within the company, the more the company can stand. And this also shows, too, how if you were to start to look, you can envision how if you start to take a few of those away, how your protection layer becomes weaker. And then, right, if one is significantly stronger than the other, right, a culture where it's big on vision and purpose but lacks ownership and mentorship, people aren't going to get anything done. And then we can all imagine what a company that had nothing but fun going on, what would that be like? It would be fun. And so we can take a look at another perfect circle within the business, and this is how the focus of the different parts of the business should go. If the leadership of the organization puts their focus and attention in supporting the team is going to turn around and take care of the customers and provide that value. The customers will then turn around and provide value back to the business, right? Exchange of funds, hopefully if we serve well, right? Good reviews, and then the business takes care of the leaders and the rest of the stakeholders, right? Dividends, stocks, stock price increase, performance incentives, all those different things. And so around we go. Everybody wins. And so just like our Earth's orbit, when we break this cycle, it shifts. It causes a disruption. Just like we said before, when leadership maybe focuses too much and straight on the business results and they bypass the team and the customer, what do we get? We get a near failure company. Or we create a great idea in the boardroom that sounds great for customers and we bypass the team, the group that's most empowered to understand the needs of the customers and to create that value. And so that leads us to just this, is that job number 1 of leadership is to instill, nurture, and protect the culture of the business. Now, if you're a startup, maybe that changes a little different. You got to wear 72 hats. But as a business grows and matures, this becomes job number 1. To live out these principles solely and focus on building the world's greatest teams, supporting those teams, and empowering them to meet the needs of the customers. So if we like circles so much, these principles don't just apply to the team and internally. But we start to talk about this notion of stakeholder value. And what if we applied these principles to everyone that was a stakeholder in the business? So what would it look like with our suppliers if we helped them with their business and helped them measure their success and didn't just try to get the goods for them cheap, fast, and whatever with quality? Same with the community. What if we brought fun into the community? What if the community understood our purpose and our values and that the good force we were creating in the world? And wouldn't it be awesome, too, as a shareholder, not to just hope for the financial performance of the company, but to understand how it's holding itself accountable, what it's measuring against? If we truly knew that, wouldn't that make that a lot better for us as a shareholder? We've already talked about customers and team. But gets us to this is when all stakeholders within a business succeed, a business becomes an unstoppable force for good. More protection layers. This is the new wave of capitalism. Businesses that are better for everyone, not just a select few. And this isn't about handouts, free rides. Everyone still has to do their part in this circle. but everyone also gets to benefit too. Doing good on time. There are a couple other elements that I think are important to culture that don't quite make it into the principles. They're sort of just byproducts or inherent to. And the first one is compensation. This is all based upon the notion that you need to pay people a fair and equitable wage. The bigger the gap becomes between the job someone or the culture that someone loves being a part of and the pay they're making, the more forced they are to make a trade-off, right? This is a big part of the notion of even the Great Resignation. And we used to tell our team and our company, any single one of you in this room today could go make 10% tomorrow more in your salary if you wanted to. It was just a reality, especially being in the tech space. They were getting hit up with recruiters every single day. And so what we started to learn over time, this wasn't necessarily an intended strategy, but people will stay with a company for, we've seen this in various studies, for 10, 20% or more less in terms of salary if they believe and are part of a great culture. And so another notion of this is when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I believe DEI becomes a byproduct when we have these principles thoroughly embedded in the business. If we're focused on building the best team and supporting that team in the best way possible, then things like sexism and racism and all the other detriments to a quality, inclusive culture start to diminish and go out the window. And when we do have something occur in one of those areas that's bad, we take care of it swiftly because our interest is protecting everyone in the culture and not just a select few. Depending on the industry and the roles you're hiring for, I will be honest and say maybe diversity is something you still have to focus on based upon natural tendencies within that industry. But overall, I think your DEI score, so to speak, increases when you focus on the company with these principles. So how do you change culture within a business? How do you be a champion for a good culture in these 8 principles? This process isn't rocket science. It starts with just some passion, maybe belief, and takes a little bit of effort. And certainly as HR professionals, you have the power to influence. Hopefully you've already started today, and the first step is assessment. Where are you? Where are the weak points? Where are the strong points? Just as much as we want to improve the weak points, and it's important to also leverage our strong points, but we have to assess, know where you are today, and go forward and improve tomorrow. Coming from the tech world, we love iteration, crawl, walk, run. What is the simplest action and step you can take tomorrow that's going to have an impact? And then you can build upon it from there. A company I recently worked with, right, wasn't very good at sharing information. It was just like, fine, once a month, just start with sending out an email that just says, here's what's going on. And that turned into, over time, a monthly presentation, right? And people came and then we just continued to build and iterate and make that improved and more meaningful. But you just started with an email. Next is hold the line. We talk about belief again. If you try to be a champion for these principles wholeheartedly, you will get tested every single day. And we talked about before, especially when bad things happen. When fear sets in, we want to run to the things we can feel and touch the most. But it's important to hold the line. Got a little bonus for you. In another place, you can look at how these principles might apply in your day-to-day life. And this is a subject that's very near and dear to many of our hearts. But over the years, as I continued my leadership and management journey, I asked myself this one question. I said, why are parenting and managing so darn similar? This is a legitimate question, right? I wasn't even being facetious. And the answer to myself became, they are. They're almost the exact same. I give a quick disclaimer as I sit in front of a room full of HR professionals. I believe you can love your team members, your employees, your coworkers. You just can't do all the stuff that's going to get you in trouble as it relates to love. But you can love your team members. Oh yeah, there's a slide there. But really, if you think about it, what's acceptable or unacceptable in one of those arenas is the same in the other. But sometimes I look back, and my kids are older now, I forgot that. But I think of how many times did I say to my kids, because I said so? A lot, right? I'm tired of arguing because I said so. I would have never, ever said that in the work environment. Wouldn't even occur to me to say that. I would have tried to have more conversations, done a lot of things to avoid saying because I said so. And so given my kids are older now, I really wish I had taken this to heart when they were a lot younger. I think I could have been a lot better parent. And as I was building myself in one arena, I think I could have been a lot stronger in the other. And so just another way you can kind of look at how important these principles can be in your whole life. So I mentioned before, resource. If you want to go to that link there, I've just accumulated a few reading materials, a few videos, different things like that for each of these principles. If you're interested in learning more, I'm sure some of it's stuff you may have seen before. Also on there, I do have a survey about today's presentation. I love feedback. Your feedback is so important to me in giving me your time today and the future people that will likely give me their time that I want to make this most impactful as possible. So I'm going to leave you with one more story today, and this story is what I think is one of the greatest examples of leadership at one of the highest levels of leadership you can possibly have. And this story is truly a testament to how powerful a seemingly small act can have on what is a big culture. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave a seemingly insignificant speech 8 days after taking office in 1933. And in this speech, he talked about some recent banking legislation that was going on, and he was just kind of there to inform the American public on what that looked like. And so in that speech, he talked about how Americans can, he trained them on how the American economy worked, how banks worked. He took accountability for some of the things the government was doing. And he even told a joke or two. And so one of the problems that was occurring at that time was, one of the big problems, the economic recovery of Americans was all the withdrawals people were making from the banking system, right? That was closing banks, shutting down banks. But the very next day that the banks opened after this first speech, all that started to stop. A very large but small step for the economic recovery of America at the time. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt would give 30 more of those speeches over the course of his presidency up until his death in 1944. And in the course of that time, if we look at the U.S. GDP growth by year, it grew anywhere from 5 to 18% every year, except for one, I believe in maybe 1937 or 1938, all the way up until 1944. And then immediately after in 1944, for the next 3 to 4 years, the U.S. GDP started to decline again. In fact, in the 80 years since Franklin Roosevelt gave his last fireside chat, that's what these are known as, you might have learned about them in elementary school, the U.S. GDP has only grown above 5% in a single year about a dozen times. And it does not have a single instance over 10%. It did it several times in the course of that 11-year period. So I'm not one to say that all you got to do is get on a radio to fix the American economy. But I have no doubt that every time Franklin Roosevelt stepped in front of that microphone, he wanted to make sure his actions matched his words and look at all of those principles that he embedded in the framework of those speeches to help the American economy provide hope. And I do absolutely believe that that's what amplified the results that we saw through that period. So I'll leave you with one last quote, but everyone talks about building a relationship with your customer. I think it's most important to build one with your employees first. And that's from Angela Ahrendts, Apple executive and Burberry CEO. Great audience. Thank you so much for your input. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.